Welcome to the Born Unbreakable podcast. I'm your host, Coach Des, mindset motivator and lifestyle entrepreneur. From loss, trauma, disappointments, and devastation to healing, hope, and betterment, what has grounded me is my unbreakable spirit. We all have that spirit within us. Every week, I'm here to inspire you with stories of perseverance and growth. My mission is to help you crush self-limiting beliefs and to be unapologetically you. You are your only limit, so take action today. Let your unbreakable ride begin now. This episode is brought to you by Brasserie. More than just bra straps, the accessory I love. With styles from dainty to daring, you will too. Click the link in the description or go to brasserie.com and use promo code BUSHIP to get free shipping on your order today. Welcome to the Born Unbreakable podcast. I have been looking forward to doing this interview for a long time. I have a special place in my heart for the subject matter that we're going to talk about today. And I'm actually talking about something that I have never talked about on the show before, in this show or my previous show, and that's politics and race. Whoa, I know what people are thinking. This is going to be crazy or divisive. And I want to just call out right from the beginning is it's quite the opposite. But I've caught your attention. I know I've done that. I say politics and I say race for the purpose of pointing out my goal is for unity, not divisiveness. So we're not here to talk about Democrats versus Republicans or anything like that. It's really to talk more about humanity, compassion, action, and what we can do as events have unfolded. Let's just be really candid. As we look back to 2020, we've seen some really unfortunate things in our society, from George Floyd and everything else that comes along with that in our African American community. And in 2021, unfortunately, we've seen those types of things continue in our Asian American and Pacific Islander, our AAPI community, and it's been unfortunate to see that. I had the great fortune to reconnect with a friend of mine who's the guest today. His name is Jeff Lee, and Jeff and I go back 20 years. I know I look 20 still. No, we actually went to UC San Diego together. We are fellow political science majors, if you could think back that far, Jeff. I know it was a while back. Eleanor Roosevelt and Thurgood Marshall was our representative years of being senators back then in college. And Jeff has gone on to do many things. I'll name a few, or else we'd be here all night long. Jeff currently is the Vice President of Public Policy and External Affairs at Rhino. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Prior to that, he was a political partner of the Truman National Security Project, and he also spent several years as the former Deputy Cabinet Secretary to the former California Governor, Jerry Brown, and many things in between over the course of the last almost 2 decades. And what really brought me to inviting Jeff to the show was a piece that he wrote in April in Politico, really being vulnerable and sharing his experience as a Vietnamese American. And I'm going to let him talk about that. But Jeff, first of all, just thank you for coming on the show.
The pleasure is all mine, Des. It's great to celebrate 20 years with you and to know that you look exactly the same in 20 years. I think that might be the Asian thing, but still, it's pretty incredible how some things change and some things don't. So it's just the technology has changed a little, but the reunion is still wonderful. So it's great. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh my gosh, it really, really is, Jeff. We've had some amazing times in creating a lot of positive change, in college, and fortunate to be able to do even more in the world today. But, what I really wanted to start our conversation is your journey into politics. So, where did that start? Why did you go in that direction? Tell us about that.
Sure. I mean, I think like anything, when we talk about politics, it's about the backstory, right? And the origin story, which I think is so powerful in American politics broadly. And that starts with my family. My family were Vietnamese refugees, right, who escaped Vietnam on a 32-foot raft and bounced around to different refugee camps in Thailand and later in the Philippines, and landed in California in 1981. I was born not too long after that. But it was a great example of understanding that I came from a community that escaped with nothing and worked to try to achieve something, and that something would be the American dream. And I would define the American dream. I think it's helpful and important to know that from an immigrant or recent immigrant perspective, especially one coming from trauma, the American dream is providing the choice for their children to choose whatever they want to do. And that's something that's pretty powerful. If you think about it from the Asian American Pacific Islander perspective, there's a lot of misnomers and stereotypes of what that means in terms of what's success, right? And that's something we'll dig into today. But my parents, used their savings and saved up what they could to start a gardening landscaping company, right? We were mowing lawns. That was my first job. I was 9 years old, mowing lawns in idyllic Orange County, California, right?
Wow.
Yeah, so that was sort of the backbone to why politics, right? It was very much a perspective of why am I, we're working so hard, we're passionate about our community. Where are we going? Who's representing us? Why should we care? And actually, it wasn't until I went to University of California at San Diego with you, Des, where we served in the student senate together. But actually, the reason why I ran for the student senate was because at Thurgood Marshall College, there were not any handicap accessible doors when I was there, and so there were a number of community members who were unable to have ease of access to their classes, and it really struck me. And I found each time I'd open the door for my peers, the first thing I asked myself was, why do they need somebody to open this door? Shouldn't they should be able to get through? And that was actually one of the reasons why I ran for office in that time, was this feeling and notion that there needs to be somebody who can support and defend and inspire others to really invest and bet on themselves. So it's sort of, you're this conduit of encouraging others to be their best selves, and at the same time recognizing that it's a team sport here. So that was sort of the original interlude into politics, right? As a little boy, I really thought at 10 years old, oh my gosh, I want to be Asian president, right? It's fifth grade, watching the presidential debates. And I remember asking my mom, Des, and I said, um, do you think I can be president? And in 2021, you know, I don't think you actually really do hear about Asian Americans being president. You hear about other groups, and totally understandable. But actually, imagine back then, imagine in 1992 to say such a thing. And my mom said, son, they don't think you're American. It's probably not a good idea. It's not safe. And you have to remember, my parents are coming from a place where their farm in Vietnam was collectivized by a dictatorial government, right? So there was a little
Right.
skepticism, Des. And I remember later that year, right? I decided I was going to run for student body, president in my fifth grade class. And I remember telling one of my classmates, like, "Hey, I'm thinking about running. Can I get your vote?" And this boy looked at me and he said, "No one's going to vote for you because nobody thinks that we should be voting for someone that eats dog." And I remember just thinking, well, I don't eat dog. What are you talking about?
Oh
But
gosh.
but also this realization that, oh my gosh, does everybody think that? Um, and there was sort of this disconnect, right? I thought I was trying to fit in. I thought I was fitting in. And later that day, I remember, you go through your class day, right? And it was after lunchtime, you come back, and then there was this drawing of what looked like me on a piece of paper that was taped to my desk, of me eating a dog. And I was obviously upset, and I started, running to the bathroom to cry a little. And I was in there for a while, and finally another boy came in to check in on me, and he was like, "Hey, like, why are you crying? Is it, did you do badly on the math test?" So there, even at that age, Des,
Yeah.
there was this perspective of like, you're the other, you are not deserving of certain standing, and that your Americanness, you're always going to be foreign. And that was something that really inspired a lot of questions I had over my teens and later my 20s about
Mhm.
trying to figure out where would I fit in the world, right? And increasingly, I still wanted to be in public service, right? So I did a number of things in my career, right? I worked in Congress, I worked in the United Nations, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and I still felt this feeling like I didn't really belong. And I mean, you and I are both proud Californians, right?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. And Mexican food, in and out, all of that stuff,
All
right?
of it.
All of that, beaches, freedom, liberty.
Woo!
But it wasn't until after I served in Afghanistan, I was asking myself, Des, like, what was I doing for our country, our state, my state? And that was when I had this opportunity to work for Jerry Brown. And it was such a fascinating experience to go to Sacramento, a place that I didn't really know too well, and being in a position to be involved in policy and help shape um, a framework or support for 40 million Americans, right? Fifth largest economy in the world,
In the world.
the place of innovation. To me, that was
Silicon Valley.
yeah, but not just Silicon Valley. I mean, one of the world's most productive and most powerful agriculture community, right?
Yes.
Napa, right?
Yeah.
Almonds, you name
I
that.
live here by
Yes.
the farms in Brentwood. We've got amazing the farms here. So we do have such an abundance here in California in our economy. So you having the opportunity to take such a large task had to feel very exciting.
I mean, when else do you have the chance to work on issues that affect real people, right? Whether it was 1.6 million veterans and supporting them and their support after serving our country, whether that was pushing for innovative technology policy that affects the world, right? Consumer protection and privacy, right? California is a leader on those issues. So to be in the chair to help make decisions on that was very powerful. And to me, that was an opportunity of a lifetime, right?
Amazing.
Um, that was priceless.
Yeah. And you stuck with it. So you've been doing this for so long, and I want to ask you about and just get really candid, and then I want to
Hmm.
move to your article is
Yeah.
what as okay, I think to the story that you just told about being in school, and that was heartbreaking to hear that you were treated that way. What was it like as an Asian American in politics? Were you on equal footing with the people around you?
I would love to tell you, Des, that everything is perfect and I was treated with dignity and I was equal and I had fair opportunities at everything. And for a long time, I tried to believe that. If I were to be honest with you, I just thought, I worked really, really hard. I was very diligent. I, helped meet my goals, my quarterly or semi-annual goals. I was supporting the boss in all the ways. But I looked around and I noticed that promotions weren't really happening. Um, Feedback I got was generally along the lines of two pieces. One, I lacked executive presence. And I think what they meant by that was I didn't behave in a way that showcased traditional leadership. I think people think like in politics, like the louder you are, the more powerful you are. And that wasn't necessarily my style. But I think also deep down, I think there was a picture that maybe I wasn't the face of leadership. And
Hmm.
maybe it's perhaps that I'm part of 6% of the United States and maybe not the majority of the
Hmm.
United States. Maybe that's part of it. And then the second thing was conflicting feedback that I received. It ranged from "you're too quiet" to "you're too loud" to "you need to focus more on the data" to "you should go with your gut feeling" to "you should be more proactive" to "you should take a step back." And I have a number of friends who I've also received this feedback, but it's mainly my friends who identify as women. There's sort of this mixed messaging. I think what they really mean is that you are not leadership material, as in you will never be leadership material, right? Regardless of what you do or don't do. So it didn't seem to matter what my real productivity was. And sometimes there were very clear goals that would be met. So just because I guess the big thing is just because you meet goals doesn't mean you'll be promoted. So I
Hmm.
think it asks a fundamental question: what does that take? And so in politics in particular, right? I look at three trends. One is people from communities of color are generally not represented in the largest numbers. There's fewer of us in the space. And
Hmm.
actually, as a result, there's less of a support network or community within these structures and spaces. Two, if they were here, none of them were getting promoted anyways, so they would leave. And three, um, every boss I've ever had, except from when I was 8 years old and mowing lawns for my father, was white. So every single boss or someone I reported to, um, they didn't have the same life experience as me. And maybe that was something that was notable.
Yeah. When you recognize that with that feedback, because that could not be more confusing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just, let me tell you two things at the opposite ends of the spectrum and expect you to figure out how to perform at your best. It's pretty defeating. When did you do anything differently as you got feedback? What did you try? What did you attempt to
Hmm.
to to see any of the kind of progress that you were hoping for in terms
Sure.
of promotion, movement, that kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I took the feedback in the moment, and so I would make the adjustments. But I noticed that a few months later, I'd be told to do the opposite again. So it was pretty clear that it was less of a ladder I was climbing and more of a treadmill that I was on. And even though I was running miles, I was staying in the same place with
Yeah.
nowhere to go except for what was in front of me, which was a wall. And I think that is pretty disheartening. And I'm not saying I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? But I will say that you and I went to a pretty notable university. Um, you and I have had careers that have spanned a lot of successes.
Mhm.
We've worked for notable organizations, in the private sector and in the public sector.
Yep.
Um, uh, for me, it was pretty clear that those credentials maybe did not matter as much as you would think.
Yeah.
I was student body president at my graduate school. I had 12 young professional fellowships with multiple leaders in multiple countries because I was really trying to assess what leadership principles or leadership values or leadership experience was I truly missing. And I thought, oh, well, I need to deepen my thought leadership because obviously I needed something else more. But it was pretty clear that those worlds really were not the solution to my challenge. The solution to my challenge was more accepting and realizing and repositioning how I viewed myself as my full self as an Asian American, Vietnamese American
Mhm.
who worked in public service. It was something that I found that I denied and denied and denied. That I found that it was much stronger to try to fit in, to blend in,
Yeah.
to laugh at the jokes. And in some ways, in many ways, I should say, when I look back, I'm a little ashamed that I could have done so much more for more people had I just been okay with being different and understood that actually being different is a strength, right? Our heritage, your heritage, my heritage, that's actually a superpower. It's a perspective that no one else really has. And certainly my bosses, who I described to you as kind of the same, would
Mhm.
never understand. I should have leaned into that more. It took me until last year to really embrace that. I spent my entire life running away from being Vietnamese American because I really thought that by being more pan-human, right, to sort of not discuss the issue because it's taboo,
Mhm.
would actually help me professionally, but more importantly, allow me to do more good for more people. But as I reflect back from public service and now in the private sector in particular, our values are even more important to be more outspoken, to make a stand, and to frankly use your voice to encourage others to speak up, right? And unfortunately, you and I know in our communities, Des, um, we are trained at a very early age, just like what my mother told me, right? Was like, hey, be careful, don't rock the boat. They don't see you as American. Be careful, because they really viewed it as life and death. It was more survive
Mhm.
rather than thrive. And I think that's unfortunately the curse and the challenge and hurdles that new Americans face is that they're working. My parents worked 18-hour days. I didn't really see them very much, right? I just heard the car start in the morning and I heard the engine turn off at night. And in between, I didn't see them very much because they were trying to provide a life for myself and my brother and sister. But that experience should have helped empower me to talk about hardship, to discuss the importance of representation, and about showing that success looks like you and me.
Mhm.
It took me a long time to get there.
Yeah. I am so connected with you right now in agreement in those feelings. I personally feel like I am still on that journey, to myself. I completely resonate with the notion of assimilation and wanting to run towards being American and not embracing my Filipino-ness, in many ways. So, yeah, thank you for being vulnerable and saying that, because I would guess that there are many others like us who have parents who are immigrants to this country and wanted nothing more than for us to fit in, you know?
It's absolutely right. And this is the thing, right? Is I totally understand why our families told us the advice they told us because it really was life and death. But for you and me, it's no longer about survive. We're the recipients of their hard work and sacrifice, which means
Mhm.
we have a responsibility, not just to ourselves, but to our community to push for representation and policies and, frankly, power that more represents thrive. We should be thriving as a community, not just
Yeah,
trying to survive. It's
absolutely.
2021.
It's 2021.
2021.
And it brings me to something really important and really powerful that you came back to, or I want to come back to, that you talked about, which is you starting to do something different. And I reflect on one of those key things being that you began to speak up more vocally, more visibly. And you sent me this piece that you did, and I was in tears. So I'm just going to keep it together here. But you sent me this piece that you wrote in Politico magazine. So I want to read the title of it, and I want to read the excerpt from the start of the article to give everyone context. And I'll put the link in the description in the show notes so people can read it as well. It's called "I Thought I Knew How to Succeed as an Asian in U.S. Politics. Boy, was I wrong." Many AAPIs have been taught that if we keep our heads down and stay quiet, one day we'll belong in America. But I began to fit in here only when I started speaking out. Go back to where you come from. You don't belong here, she calls out. I'm stunned. It's March 6th, 2020, and a stranger out of nowhere has just spit on me in the Reno-Tahoe International Airport. There's a virus in the news, something that came from China, but it's still a few days before the country really starts buckling under the weight of COVID-19. Personally, I'm just trying to get to my flight to San Francisco. I look around, saliva oozing down my cheeks, and I see a dozen witnesses look the other way. To them, it's already never happened. Instinctively, I shrug it off. Looks like I should have brought an umbrella with me. This isn't the first time that something like this has happened to me. I wryly smile and slink away. After all, I'm Vietnamese American. You had me at hello, Jeff. I mean, I read the article beginning to the very end, and I had so many emotions, but you spoke up. What made you do this? And what have you gained from telling a story that is so personal?
Sure. I mean, it's not exactly like I was very excited to relive some of the most horrible things that have ever happened to me, right? But we are in a time of historic and unprecedented, and I should say very overt hate towards Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. I want to make it very clear, though, this has always been around. It's just that it's on camera now. And I would say maybe even worse, it's accepted in some corners, right? Like that story that you read about what happened to me last March in the airport while I was rushing to a work trip. Um, what I wanted readers to feel and understand was being spit on is horrible because there's this feeling like you are somehow subhuman. But to be completely honest, the worst part is the feeling when you look around and you realize that you really don't matter at all. And a feeling that the conditions that allow for such a thing to happen, to be accepted, and to be some degree be complicit in, that that was a tipping point for me. Now I'll also tell you, Des, I have been spit on before. It's not the first time. And I will tell you what went through my head, besides making a joke about it, because that's what we do. We shrug it off because we're conditioned to blend back in quickly. Because actually we just assume that's our fault, that it's our shame, and that we were the one in error.
Mm-hmm.
So what I was thinking immediately was, if I say something, the police will come. And in 2021 and 2020 in America, what will that mean for me? I suspect it probably would have meant an altercation. And unfortunately, in our country, altercations with people of color and certain communities with power um, usually lend itself to bad results, bad outcomes, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was also at the time working for a company, and I was thinking immediately, if something did happen, what would they be in my corner? And I'd like to think so, but you really can't chance such a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I also have an active security clearance. So would my security clearance be revoked? These are things I was thinking about. It wasn't about retribution. It wasn't about making a stand and being super brave. It was just about trying to get to my flight because um, I knew I'd already lost, but it was losing something I had already lost, which was my dignity. And so on that flight, I told myself that there has to be a different way for us um, to approach making a stand and showing that we deserve to be here too, that we are American. I mean, Des, there are Asian Americans in this country that have lineages in the United States going back to 1850, right? Going back to building railroads,
Mm-hmm.
going back to Japanese internment camps, going back to other waves of migration. There are Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders that have been in the United States longer than many European Americans. Like, we need to make this clear. Asian America as a whole is America. And in our home state of California, it's very much the case. Look at San
Mm-hmm.
Francisco. Look at Asian American Pacific Islanders in the state, 15%.
Yeah.
Think about how much influence our society has. Look at the food. Look at mixed martial arts. Look at the movies.
Mm-hmm.
They see, our society really seems to love all those things, but why can't they treat us like human beings?
Mm-hmm.
And it's touchy, right? Because I think we can acknowledge that we're not the only community that has been disproportionately affected,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there is unfortunately a lie that Asian Americans are some perfect model minority that then is used to then compare us to other groups, and that is then treated as a wedge to then create a divide and conquer narrative and strategy, which makes us a very less than perfect union.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you enough just how I hate being used, and at the same time being treated like I should just be happy to be here, that I should accept what I'm given, and that, listen, you just, you have a great job, and you have a great opportunity to make a home for yourself. That should be fine. I just wasn't going to accept that. And I will tell you, in the year later, as the year went, as I was formulating these ideas, I had two other really major events happen that really pushed me over. The first was, unfortunately, COVID-19 affected many Asian Americans and many other communities. In fact, I unfortunately, personally, and I know many people were directly affected by COVID-19, but I lost 9 friends in 2020. I went to 9 of these Zoom memorials, and some of it was COVID-19 related. Some of it was other health issues, and some of it was just purely tragic things. Here's the worst part. Every single one of them under the age of 47. Now, life expectancy in the United States is closer to 80, right? 78, 79, 47. So there was this feeling, um, like you could no longer put this off, because life is so short and precious. And so that's among us peers, our friendships. But then in August, I was having a conversation with my parents. My parents, after they ran this gardening company in Southern California, they uprooted and moved to Southern Georgia, where they run a free range organic chicken farm. Okay. I know it sounds pretty random, Des, but our family has had a long history in agriculture. And they started this farm with nothing and built this, I think, pretty successful business. They have, at any given point, 200,000 chickens running around. They do pretty well. They work long hours, but they do real things and serve real people. It's pretty cool,
Amazing.
right? It's pretty cool.
Really cool.
Yeah. But when COVID-19 happened, by August, a number of the neighbors, friends, community members that they had forged relationships with over the 20 years had told them that they couldn't be friends with them anymore, because they being my parents, were the reason why there was a virus. Now, never mind that my parents are from Vietnam originally. Never mind that they broke bread together, did business together, saw their kids grow up together. Never mind that my parents are American citizens and actually historically probably have more concerns about China justifiably than other groups, right? If you had to go deep, right, in
Yeah,
history,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Right, as you know, Filipino, I mean, similar, I think. But to hear my parents try to diminish that shame, to try to hear them pretend that it didn't bother them was just absolutely crushing. And that's when I decided. That was the moment where I decided I was going to start speaking up. I wasn't just going to think about it anymore. It had been on
Yeah.
my mind constantly. I wasn't going to think about it anymore. And that's when I decided I was going to go to the medium that I felt strongest in, which was in writing,
Mhm.
which writing is a dying art. And who the heck has the attention to read, right, in the social media world? But my thinking was I would write in the local paper
Mhm.
and highlight the contributions of immigrants during COVID-19, right? Immigrants at the front lines of healthcare, right? Um, I think you're probably aware that you have Filipino nurses that have disproportionately been affected by COVID-19. They're on the front line. Um, Thinking about immigrants who were supporting their small businesses, trying to keep things afloat. Immigrants who were involved in the research and development of vaccines. Um, Immigrants who serve as doctors in rural communities like my parents, right? In Georgia, there are a number of counties that don't even have a doctor, right? Or a pediatrician or an OBGYN. But you know who ends up serving these groups is immigrants. So just the disconnect between these people who do everything they can to serve this country to then be told during a time of conflict that it's your fault, even though they've been here their whole 40 years. That was hard. And so I decided to write that piece. It was in this tiny little paper called the Albany Herald. Probably a readership of, I don't know, 30,000 max.
Mhm.
Um, but something happened. The piece came out. And later on, um, those same people went up to my parents and apologized. And that was when I realized that when you speak up, it does matter. I couldn't tell you what I thought would happen. That was probably not the likely scenario I thought. Let's just be real here, right? Especially in our
Yeah.
culture today. Like, forgiveness and this sort of thing, of course, is important, right? But it's not exactly where people eat crow. That's not what you expect. But that's when I started writing different pieces in different publications on different issues, mainly affecting, um, you know, marginalized groups and paths to support them in the COVID-19 times, right? Whether that was veterans, whether that was rural communities who are underserved, like my parents, whether that was, um, groups affected by, lack of access to the criminal justice support system, right?
Mhm.
So much of America um, was on deferred maintenance of sorts, right? Like it was very clear that some of the institutions that were supposed to support us were not doing that. And in COVID-19, I think, as you know, that was very much exposed, right? Not just in terms of systems and structures, but also in terms of people's true feelings about who is considered American and who's considered the other.
Mhm.
So that was my moment to say something, and it's something that as we go through this 2021, we are seeing quite an awakening here, right? You're seeing more activism, engagement, allyship, support, demand for something different, for something more. And I'm proud to be able to lend my voice to encourage others, most importantly, to speak
Mhm.
up themselves. Because I'm nobody, right? But if someone like me, someone that just took the time to write something, to say something? Couldn't we all do a little bit of something to say something? Because we have no idea who's reading or hearing our voice. And maybe that could be the difference for a young person, a single mom, um, someone who's been toiling in middle management, looking
Mhm.
for somebody to absolutely hear and see them, to finally be seen. That to me is really what we as a community and we as a nation need to be doing. We need to be encouraging others to share their stories, because the story is what is powerful to me, right? Hearing and watching people showcase their gifts for others. We need to encourage this. We need to cherish this. We need to nurture this, rather than what I see as divisive acts of hate and violence that um, and scapegoating that makes us all want to return back into our shell, back into just trying to get along,
Mhm.
just trying to get by, and just trying to not stick out or stand out.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, you've written many pieces, so you've gotten quite good at doing this, and I think that is such a powerful response that those individuals gave to your parents. What has been some other notable response that you've gotten from speaking out?
Sure. The article you referenced in Politico from April, when that piece landed, I received probably about 3,000 emails from strangers, um, probably about 2,500 messages on LinkedIn from strangers, about 1,000 text messages from people who have known me over the years. And don't get me wrong, Des. I didn't expect to be everyone's Asian friend. That's not that's not what I was trying to be. But I think our communities were really looking for someone to really say something, because as you know from this year, right after the horrible tragedy in Atlanta, the murders of these women of Asian heritage, which we have to be very clear. Women, Asian American, Pacific Islander women during this pandemic, during this wave of hate, have been negatively affected much more, right? I mean, as an Asian American guy, I mean, I can't say it's been roses, but I can just tell you right now, it's been disproportionately far worse for women. And Stop AAPI Hate, which is more, this is voluntary submissions. They were able to say, yeah, they 2/3 of these, uh, you know, statements and supporting concerns came from women. You and I both know it's much higher than that.
Mhm.
And it's probably a number far bigger than 3,800 that were reported. This is reported, right? Not reality. But that number is far higher. But unfortunately, in our community, we're the least likely to report hate crime. Some of that is culture, some of that is shame, as we talked about, and some of that is cultural barriers or language barriers, right? Not feeling empowered to feel like they would be believed or that they'd matter. So that to me was a very powerful response from that piece. I would say, for a perspective of real results, right? Some of the highest levels of our government reached out after the piece to talk about representation for us, to talk about government services for us, to talk about how we fight hate crime together.
Mhm.
When you write something, it's not exactly like you're thinking that people from the White House would call you. It's not like you think that members of Congress are going to call you and take copious notes or just want to be there for you. It's not what you really expect in 2021, right? You don't expect your leaders to actually actively try to reach out to you, but that's what happened. And it wasn't just leaders in political circles. It was also leaders in different nonprofit organizations, different community groups, associations, all coming out. And I will say, not even just these groups, but and 3,000 messages from students, from aspiring artists, from future lawyers, from people passionate to be a part of the innovation economy, to classically trained musicians, whatever the case, actors.
Hmm.
It was such a swath of people. And I guess I just didn't anticipate how much resonance there'd be. And it reminded me of this very powerful message I try to give to my teams whenever they're in a place where they're not feeling great. And I try to remind people of the four most powerful words in the world, which is, I believe in you. And there was so much of this feeling, this togetherness I would feel in all these messages. And I got through almost all of them. I think I'm down to the last 75. But this feeling like for the first time in a very long time, I was not alone, and that our community really does matter, and its potential is incredible. And so now you're seeing this awakening that's happening, that people are no longer accepting what they're given. And this is a group of people that have a history of being pretty tough and dealing with adversity. But this is the big theme that I got from many of these messages, which was at the end, an understanding that to truly be a part of something, to truly feel like you can take on some of these challenges, to feel like you can showcase your gifts and your skills and demand what you deserve and what you'll fight for, you needed to embrace your heritage. And so for someone who was, I would say, more of a banana, yellow on the outside, white on the inside,
Hmm.
to have helped spark a connection for people to embrace the heritage they've always run away from. That heritage then inspires action. That heritage inspires stories of why you fight discrimination. That heritage records and sparks activism and a booming voice in our public discourse. And this feeling um, beyond this booming voice, and this is the kicker, right? That your heritage is a strength, not a weakness, that can push and drive and spark national change. And I'm really proud that as a Vietnamese American, I get to be a part of that, right? And I know that you and your listeners, our community, will listen to this, and I hope they understand that they get to be a part of the difference that matters and that they matter. That to me is the big takeaway here, is by embracing your whole self, you can make the biggest difference for the most people.
Yeah. And I thank you for setting that example, because you took brave action. And obviously, it took some pretty unfortunate situations to really drive you to do that. And once you did, you didn't take your foot off the accelerator, you know? You can, and I just want to say that it's an important point to make, because showing up in a very specific time of adversity is something that we've seen great example of, and I applaud. I mean, uh, but continuing to show up is a different story, right?
Totally. And I would say this too, right? I get so many questions about, okay, what should I do now? Right? Because now have had this sort of aha moment. And, I'll tell you four things that I think people should do that I think are, um, they're things that are totally doable for everybody. They're not necessarily the most political things. It's sort of I think the baseline of where we should be going to take steps forward, right? I mean, the first thing I mentioned, right, is share your story, share your family's experience, and then have a conversation with somebody. In our politics and in our society today, we're always talking at each other or past each other. Have the conversation. Here's the thing. having these conversations about equity and justice and racial equality, the hardest audience to have that conversation with is with your family. I'll just tell you, I get countless emails from friends saying, I can talk to strangers. I'm happy to have a discussion. I can't talk to my uncle.
Which is interesting because when you hear the most impactful things is it starts at the kitchen table, right?
Totally.
How many times do we hear that when it comes to changing ideology, influencing new behavior, new patterns, new habits? And it's the hardest place to do it.
It's the hardest. It's totally the hardest. And so have this conversation, right, with loved ones, because if you can win over your loved ones, I think really anything is possible. Honestly, right? I mean, think about our families, right? It's our families that bring out the best and sometimes not the best in us, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It's amazing how you can be a young professional one moment, and then with your family, you're 13 years old again.
Oh yeah.
Or that
Story of our lives.
exactly, or worse, your family members go from being the adults to being the children, and you go to being the adult. That is interesting. I've seen that a lot lately.
All the
Uh,
time.
the second thing I'd say, right, for us to think about really tangible, real things we can do, learn our history. Asian American Pacific Islander history is so rich and beautiful and complicated. It requires real inspection. I always recommend to people at a very basic level, the baseline would be to watch the PBS series on Asian Americans. That is just incredibly powerful. And yeah, ideally, read an AAPI author, any author, because they'll share a part of their story that is representative of a community of color in a time of complication that I think is very relevant to where we are now.
Absolutely.
The third one, and I think you'll appreciate this, is um, support AAPI small businesses and restaurants that have been disproportionately affected, right? Think about all the Chinatowns and Koreatowns, Japantowns, Chinatowns, little Manilas that are still not seeing the foot traffic that you would think at this point in heading to summer.
Mm-hmm.
So you can vote with your feet, right? You can decide who you want to support and encourage. And these are businesses and community members that um, you know dealt with significant acts of hate against them, and in fear had to close their businesses, right? It wasn't
Yeah,
just COVID-19. It wasn't just the lack of loans, right? It was also because of hate. And then the
absolutely.
fourth thing, which I know you are definitely a big supporter of, but um, vote with your time and mentor someone. Listen to a young person, encourage them, teach them, share your experiences with them. There's nothing more powerful um, than giving your time and your wisdom to somebody who really would benefit from that life experience, right? Um, learning something new from failure. I mean, that's great. Learning someone else's failure and taking that's wisdom, right?
Oh
Let's give
yeah.
people more wisdom.
Yeah,
Mentorship,
that's
yeah.
huge. It's huge. Mentorship goes a long way. You and I have um, passion in this area, and it's it's how you grow the next generation of empowerment. Because you brought up something so important that I want to make sure to call out specifically, which is we have the power right now, today, in 2021, to change the narrative. We have the power to do that right now with our voices, with the utility of technology at our fingertips, and that's the beauty of what we've been able to utilize in the pandemic and communicate. A lot of critical pieces of information. So I'm so glad that you shared those four things. So I mean, What I'm hoping that your story has inspired is a key dominant big headliner, which is action. You know, we're no longer in a position to sit and watch and observe. My mom got me a taser the other day because she said, "This is the times that we're in.
Mhm.
You're Asian and I am, and I'm older and I'm worried about what's going to happen. And when I went to the Asian market to buy the such and such, I saw this and I watched this on the news, and and I totally understand, right? My mom is in that generation. She is seeing and hearing things, and it is scary. And I'm not, discrediting that at all, because it's real and it is what is portrayed constantly
Can I
when you
just
turn on the TV.
can I just say first off, the the video footage of a random act of hate or a random act of violence against an Asian American is pretty common right now, and your mom's fears are unfortunately valid
Hmm.
and not unreasonable. I'll give you an example of just how pervasive this fear is you're talking about. The
Hmm.
fear where your mother feels like she needs to get you a taser. Okay,
Hmm.
I'm on a WhatsApp chain with a number of friends. There's about 30 of us on there. The number one conversation right now is a conversation about what is the best pepper spray. And the conversation is pretty detailed. It goes into painful and striking, um, how to say, points where it talks about uh, what kind of handle is good, how long is the chain, does the chain include an alarm, is there a flashing light, what about decibels, how loud is the decibels, right? What about the spray radius, and also does the spray radius come back to you, and can you attach a knife to this? This is a conversation from young people between the ages of 27 to 44. Again, these are folks from a pretty consistent background of young professional that you would picture thinking they should be able to walk down the street probably without fear. And unfortunately, that is not the case.
Yeah. And I just go back to the importance of what you said. If we can be tangible, authentic, vulnerable in these conversations, we can start to create community and embrace each other, so we can start to feel safe.
And it's this perspective of strength in numbers, right? Like
Oh
that's
yeah.
why it's important that you speak up, right? Because if you speak up, others people speak up. And then it isn't just a few voices, it's one very loud voice, right? And that is power. Amassing power is the difference between feeling fear and feeling strength. That's
Yep.
why it's so important to lead with that, right? Rather than going into detail about, what kind of taser is legal in the state of California, right? I mean, just I would personally, I'd rather have you put your money into other things, right? I don't know. What about stock, right? I mean,
Right.
there's many things that you should,
Oh,
put your money in.
absolutely.
Yeah. What about your CrossFit membership, or, buying dinner for family? Like, I would rather have you invest in that, but instead, you're investing not only money but your mind share, your bandwidth, your worries into a very justifiable and understandable concern of your physical and mental health and safety.
Hmm.
This
Yeah.
isn't just you, and this isn't just your mom, and this isn't just me, and this isn't 30 of my friends on WhatsApp. This is a lot more people than that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is where it starts, and this is just the beginning. I mean, we're just scratching the surface here. This is the, you know, tip of the iceberg, as they may say, and it's conversations that we can replicate like this. And I hope this has been an example for people. So, I know it seemed heavy, but I hope there was inspiration and just, being able to think specifically of what you can do to make a difference, whether you are AAPI or whether you are an ally to our community. Everybody can make a difference in being able to open the aperture of conversations like this. But I want to ask, so you've done all of this, you've taken this huge position in a new role as a vice president at Rhino. What is next for Jeff Lee? What does this road mean for you?
Well, I mean, first off, let me tell your audience about Rhino first, right? Rhino. So I always wanted to work for a startup, and it's just so terrifying, like to say that as someone who's worked in government and bigger organizations, right? My previous company was 38,000 people, but Rhino is a small Series B startup, fintech startup that is trying to provide solutions and alternatives to traditional old cash security deposits for renters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, that COVID-19's taught us is that a lot of working families don't just have money laying around. That's one thing I know for sure. And
Mm-hmm.
housing, in particular in the state of California, is no easy thing to find, not even for renting, let alone buying. Good luck even trying to buy inventory, not an easy task, right? But, think about, the average American family who has 1 month's rent, 1 month's last rent, and a 1 month security deposit. Who has that right now? And the marketplace of renters is about 120 million. So 1/3 of America is renting something. That's the universe. And think about all the people that once, right now we have moratoriums on evictions across the US.
Mm-hmm.
That will not be there forever. So think about who is going to need to find security, physical security, and find a new place to live. And one barrier to housing is the upfront cost. In particular, this Byzantine security deposit, right? So imagine if instead of putting up the $2,000, right, $1,500 upfront, imagine you just pay $10, $20. Now it's non-refundable, but you don't have to give up $2,000 that you probably aren't going to get back in full. Probably not. I don't know about you, but that's never happened to me in all the renting I have had. Even if I keep it pristine. So yes, you would lose 10 to 20 bucks a month, right? Let's say, but you would then have, in theory, right, the money to put those resources into things that you really need. And think about working families. Think about um, undocumented community members. Think about families experiencing economic disruption. Think about families experiencing domestic violence. Think about aspiring labor members who are now apprentices and don't have the upfront money yet. Think about young professionals in their first internship, but it's
Yeah.
somewhere else. Think about other public servants who probably don't have the means. Think about the Bay Area and trying to find a place to live and putting
Yeah.
up that deposit. So I'm covering this company's public policy across 50 states.
Oh,
Um,
that sounds so easy. Yeah,
yeah,
great.
it is fascinating, but learning about housing needs, barriers, concerns, priorities, whether that's San Francisco or Dallas or Miami, there's so many challenges. I told myself if I was going to go to a startup, it would be a startup that was trying to promote real good in a real way for real people. And I think this is a great opportunity, right? This is about engaging communities, having conversations with property management groups, right? Having a thoughtful discussion with policymakers and local leaders, and then trying to highlight the opportunities for innovation um, in the housing sector And to have that conversation in the public space right now is very timely. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm really excited about that. It's going to be a lot of work, but again, 120 million renters. Rhino's services right now are in about 1 million homes.
Hmm.
So it's 1/120th of the market.
You
That
got
to
a
me
lot.
is
You got a lot of work ahead of you,
a
Jeff.
lot of upside. A lot of upside.
A
Yes, a
lot
lot
of
of sleep,
upside.
a lot of sleepless nights, but I'm excited for the opportunity.
From the non wheelchair accessible doors 20 years ago to the doors across America. I mean, you are fighting the good fight. And the last couple of questions that I have for you are
Hmm.
really an opportunity to get your perspective, for to people to get to know you and to get your perspective a little bit more. So
Sure.
I have 5 questions.
Okay. I'm ready.
The first one, we'll start with something easy, I think.
Hmm.
What 3 words best describe you?
Oh my goodness. Uh, High energy positivity.
Amazing. Okay. They start to get a little harder.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I hope there's not a wrong answer.
No, there's
I hope
not a
not.
wrong
I hope
answer for
not.
sure.
No, of course.
Okay. What's something about yourself that you're working on improving?
Oh my gosh, there's so many things right now. One of the things I'm trying to improve on, actually, is taking the time to do breathing exercises. It's something that I wish I had learned to do more consistently early on in my life.
Mhm.
But at a startup, the pace is so crazy that you really need to center yourself before you dive in. And so just breathing, which I know sounds so basic, but when you're overwhelmed and you're trying to do so many things that push you into so many different directions at the same exact time, it's just helpful to let yourself have some perspective before you dive back in. That's
Mhm.
something I'm trying to improve on. Um, I'm still breathing, so that's so good far so good, right?
Right? Yeah,
So far I'm still breathing. That's great.
yeah.
But
There's
I'm trying to do.
studies that
Mhm.
show the benefit of practicing mindful breathing even at 1 and 2 minute clips.
It makes a ton of sense. I'm just trying to breathe on 30 seconds, 45 seconds at any given time.
You're like,
I'm
"Hold
working on
on,
it.
2 minutes? That's too long. I got
Yeah.
30 seconds right now."
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's already 10 emails going in, a ding, 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 right? So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
for 30, 45 seconds is a good start for me. I have a
That's a
lot of
good
room. I
start.
have a lot of room to improve, Des.
That's good. That's good. You're
Mhm.
working on that. I like that.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right.
What's a self-limiting belief that you've had to overcome?
Um, you know, if I were to be honest, I think this feeling like there are far more qualified people for anything, and that I am generally not qualified for things. So I think the phrase people use is imposter syndrome. I think I felt that for a long time, and I'm sure your listeners experienced that. I heard from a close friend a great definition of imposter syndrome, which I wanted to share,
Mhm.
and I think it really makes sense. But it's when your competence far exceeds your confidence. And if that's the case, there's a lot of people that have imposter syndrome, right? And
Oh, yeah.
I will tell you, if there are people that don't have imposter syndrome with that definition, maybe we don't have an issue and other people have an issue. So that's something I've thought about though, right? It's like you spend so much time trying to just be competent, you sort of forget actually to believe in yourself.
Yeah.
Right? And to the point we talked about earlier, I had wish I'd had stronger or more long-lasting mentorship, right? Had that happened, maybe I would have gotten over that quicker, right?
Yeah.
So again, very powerful that we give back.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that is certainly one that many people are overcoming right there with you. Okay. What is one thing that you want to see changed in the world?
Oh my goodness. The one thing I want to see change in the world these days here, I mean, I would love I would love it if we had a better opportunity to share our failures. I say this because we so focus on like the success story. I wish there was more space to talk about our shortcomings, because I think our shortcomings is so much more powerful to learn from. Because I think if you were successful all the time, what did you actually learn?
Yeah.
Right. So I wish that I wish organizations, particularly in the public sector, uh, learn to appreciate and then quickly adapt to the lessons learned from falling short on goals.
Yeah.
So I would apply that to my life as well. Um, I think that we would be better served learning from things that didn't go our way. That said, and this might be an Asian thing, I wish that we could spend more time celebrating success too. So it's this balancing act. I mean, so much of government and public service, and now being in a startup, right, is okay, let's move on. Like, that's the next problem, the next challenge, the next community to support, the next investment, the next achievement, the next milestone, rather than sort of just like taking that 30 to 45 seconds to breathe a little
Yeah.
and acknowledge that something really positive happened, and
Yeah.
that we should be very thankful, and that we can appreciate that and share that with our team.
I agree. Yeah. That is awesome. Okay, my final question
Mm.
is, what's one of the best pieces of advice that you've ever been given?
Oh, the best piece of advice I've been given that I definitely could recite on air is, if it's not you, it's going to be someone far worse. And I just say this to say that you have quality and you deliver something unique and special. Don't discount yourself before you walk into the arena. That took a long time to acknowledge, but I think that's something I would share. That to me
Wow.
was very that's very just true to what we do and live every day now.
Yeah. Oh, that is so good. Jeff, how can people find you and follow you, and because they want to be the 5,000th person that might want to ask you a question?
You can follow me on Twitter at Jeffrey D. Lee, JEFFREYDLE, with one E since it's Vietnamese.
One E.
So that's a great way you can follow me, and that's where you can probably follow some of my upcoming writing that I
Yes.
have. I usually try to post writing, and that does happen to receive attention in national publications and regional works. And luckily, we're in a time where there's more than enough to talk about. So I hope that you'll follow along and take the time to read and tell me what tell me what you think, and tell me what you didn't love. I
Yeah.
certainly would. I mean, welcome the opportunity for dialogue and discourse, right? And if you want to send hate mail, I get a lot of that too. So that's totally okay. A friend of mine told me, a writing friend told me, if you don't get hate mail, you're doing something wrong. And I think there's some truth to that.
Right? It's
Yeah.
true. When you when
Mhm.
you put your voice out there, there's going to be agreement and there's going to be conflict, but I think that's what's healthy. Is the point is that there wouldn't you're creating conversation that didn't exist, and we need to get somewhere. So
Absolutely.
better to get somewhere and make progress than to be stuck in our archaic archaic ways, right?
That's right.
So, thank you so much for the abundance of time. I know that you've got a whole host of things to solve based on what you've described. So, you just really holding space means a lot to me because, like I said, this has been, I always have toiled with this of oh well, when's the right time? Oh, I don't want to ruffle feathers. Or, oh, I don't, maybe we just, have one-on-one conversations. It's not something that needs to be on the air or recorded. And it's like the same reservations that you've described is the courage that you've inspired me to share and to open up the doors and set an example. So thank you for inspiring this conversation. It means a lot. And I know that those listening will get a lot out of it too.
Well, I appreciate it, and I hope all of your viewers and listeners here just know that we're in a time where you should absolutely be unapologetically yourself. You can do so much more, if you bring your whole self to our communities. So for that, I'm very thankful for the opportunity to speak to you and your listeners. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, yes. And now I'm looking forward to an opportunity when we can actually congregate in person at some point because 20 years is just a long time to not, well, no, we did in between. There was a time when you visited and when you were doing your big running and
That's right.
you came out and we did hang out, and that was
That's right. But it's never enough, and I
it
look
is
forward.
never enough.
And you know what? You only live once unless you're Buddhist or Hindu. So we should make it count.
That's
And
right.
I look forward to our next milestone together. Hopefully over Mexican food, which I miss tremendously. Let me tell you, being in the DC area, I can't say it's the greatest Mexican food in history, and I certainly miss that in the great state of California. So I'm
You're
looking forward to
you're
that.
you're talking about carne asada fries, Jeff. Let's just, let's put it out there. We had that in San Diego. Now I'm just unleashing things that maybe others have not had the good fortune to try. But if you are ever down in San Diego, give that a try. It'll change your
Absolutely.
whole life. Change your whole life.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you won't be able to move for a couple days, but it'll be well worth it. So,
Yeah.
no struggle, no progress, right?
That's right. Oh, well, thank you so much. And we will definitely be talking more, my friend.
I look forward to it.
I am so grateful to have Jeff on the show. I personally am influenced by Jeff's work and inspired to do even more around empowering the Asian Pacific Islander community as an Asian Pacific Islander myself. And one of the biggest revelations that I had is just this notion of assimilation that you have if you're an immigrant, come from an immediate immigrant family. So Jeff talked about his parents coming from Vietnam, and my father came here from the Philippines. And I remember when I was young being taught that English was the thing that I needed to learn, and blending in and doing things the American way was the way. And it wasn't until later years, through teenage years and adulthood, that I embraced aspects of my heritage that Jeff was talking about. And I will fully admit right now that I have more work to do to understand all of my roots and do more to not only learn from myself, but to be able to pay that forward in my family as the next generations come about, and being able to have those tough conversations that Jeff said, because it does start at the kitchen table. When we can have that conversation amongst ourselves in our families about race, about diversity, about equality, about tough things, then we are even more empowered and equipped and prepared to have those conversations outside of our homes. And that's the place that we need to get, right? That's the beauty of community connection and being able to thrive like Jeff was talking about. Don't get me wrong. We have a long way to go in this area, a long way to go. But I am hopeful that we can be the people that change the narrative and show up for each other when things get difficult, and we're treated, regardless of what race or religion or creed that you believe in, that we are first human beings and we treat each other with kindness and compassion, because that is the fabric of what makes us stronger, is when we come together with our love for each other and for people. That's when great things happen. Divisiveness does not serve us. History has repeated that 1,000 times over. Wars have been started, and we still see disappointing things that are happening today that is less than what we should be. And if we all did our part to show up and take action, we can get closer and closer to making it better for the generations to come. So I thank you for listening to the important conversation that is just the beginning, not the ending. It is opening a door for you to be able to expand this conversation even further in your own circles, at your own dinner table, and the dinner tables that you're invited to. So I hope you've been inspired. I thank you so much for tuning into the Born Unbreakable podcast. Tune in again next week for an episode. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you have not already. Follow the show so you can stay updated on everything that is happening, because there is always something exciting to look forward to. I will see you again next week.